Title of this lecture is the brainstem. We're going to focus just on the bottom up here. We're not going to deal with the cerebrum at all today. So if you would start about halfway down the page here, and we're going to draw this. This is a tube of a gigantic bundle of nerves that travels through your vertebral column. What's its name? This is your spinal cord. Now that's not really part of the brainstem itself, but it does connect to the brainstem. The rest of this is housed within the skull. This passes through the foramen magnum. Everything else is above that. There is a small oblong lump. Notice what descriptor I used. Oblong. That's because this thing is known as the Medulla Oblongata. Medulla is generally a word that means like the middle portion, like things like kidneys and adrenal glands, where there's a distinct outside and a distinct inside. Medulla generally means that. I'm not sure why it's medulla here, maybe because it's in the middle of the brain area there. Oblongata because it's kind of oblong shaped. In fact, if you were to dissect away a portion of this, then you looked underneath there, there is the structure within the medulla oblongata that looks like an olive, so much so that they call it the olive, or olivary body, which means something that looks like an olive. Okay.
Good job, science.
Yeah, go science. Now the medulla oblongata, of all the structures here, is the one that really kind of keeps you alive. All the other portions of the brain and the cerebrum, I don't want to say you could do without them, but you kind of can. This one you can't and still live, because amongst other things, and other things meaning there's a giant list of very specific things, and then there's sort of a growing list of ambiguous things that we're mostly sure that the medulla does. That's the kind of frustrating / exciting thing about studying the brain, is we're still not 100% sure on most of this stuff. Okay, but here's what we do know. Medulla oblongata is responsible for heart rate. It is also responsible for respiration. Basically, it keeps you breathing, keeps your heart beating, speeds your heart up when necessary. It is responsible also for blood pressure. That's a pretty broad description here. But it can control a lot of vasomotor fibers, which are the things that basically, the nerves that clamp down your blood vessels to increase blood pressure when necessary, okay? Now, amongst these other functions that it controls, there are some things that seem like they wouldn't be related to this. But let me focus on this just a little bit longer. When people overdose on drugs and die, it's because of this, most of the time. Unless it was a pH thing that messed up the blood, but like if they overdose on like opiates and those types of things, they get into here and it basically slows down the activity of the brain, gets in between the synapses. But overloading this area means that when you fall asleep, your brain quits breathing and you no longer breathe, ever. So, yeah, say no to drugs. Okay. All right. It also does things that have coordinated muscle movements, but things that you didn't have to learn, like this. Sneezing. There is not a sneezing class, nor is there a vomiting class.
Is that what messing with the brain injury because you like not helping sleep?
Yeah, because when I had a concussion and I had that spinal or that fluid come out, like it came out my nose.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was hit really hard, and they like didn't let me sleep for like 48 hours or something. Like,
Well, if you can, in that case, it has more to do with coma, less to do with this. From what I understand, is that it's easier to slip into a coma if you have a brain injury and then you fall asleep. That's my understanding of it. I don't know that it necessarily has to do with this. I think as long as there's not pressure building in the cranium so much for that. That's the other main thing. This concussion, if there's a bleed in the brain, it puts pressure on the brain and kind of smushes it down. toward that foramen magnum, and if there's too much pressure put on this, it can cause that. But yeah, mostly I think that has to do with coma. Yeah. Okay, the other one is this, swallowing. These all involve coordinated movements of muscles. And this is a short list. There's a lot more things than this. But you never had to learn this. Babies are born, they can sneeze, they can throw up, they can swallow, otherwise they wouldn't have the ability to survive, once they need to start nursing and whatnot. So, all these coordinated movements programmed into here already.
Why do babies vomit, like, just randomly?
They spit up more than vomit. Their digestive system is still developing. I mean, they drank some, fluid in there, but they really haven't had anything to break down yet. So there's part of that. Sometimes they get overfull. Sometimes, stomachs are upset. Sometimes it's something called pyloric stenosis, which is like past the stomach. The pyloric sphincter, which allows things to move from the stomach into the intestines, is like the muscle's too thick and it can't pass stuff through. But that's usually like a violent vomiting, like projectile, like a firing a straight line of vomit over a meter. Look up a video of projectile vomiting when you get a chance. Viewers at home. Okay, let me show you a picture of it here. Yeah, because that lump doesn't really help you in this exactly. And I'll show you a picture as we move our way up here as well, so you can follow along. Okay. So here is a sagittal view of the brain. Okay. This is the spinal cord down here, coming up just a little bit. This lump right here is the medulla oblongata. And we're gonna follow this map on our way up here as well as we continue to draw stuff. Okay. Did you notice there was a lot bigger lump above this lump? Okay, so make a lot bigger lump here.
Kind of looks like a person.
A little bit. All right. This lump right here is a bridge between the cerebrum, the upper portion of the brain, to the cerebellum, what we're going to draw, and medulla. And so they call it the bridge. But because the bridge sounds kind of simple, they use Latin, which is pons. Okay? Pons is the bridge. Between medulla oblongata, cerebellum, and cerebrum, or basically the rest of the brain. So it connects those things. It also has the ability to modify respiratory respiratory rhythmicity centers in the medulla oblongata. Basically, how deep you breathe, fast. Hold on, I got you. Okay. It modifies the respiratory rhythmicity centers in the medulla oblongata, more or less dictating how deeply you breathe, how quickly you breathe, things like that. So we can't say totally that everything to do with breathing happens here in the medulla, because the pons is strongly linked to it with its ability to modify what happens there. Okay? So these two work together to allow us to breathe. So, the pons used to be called the pons of something. It was actually named after a scientist. Pons of, I think I have it saved. Just kidding, I can't find it. Varoli, Pons Varoli.
What's that for ethnicity?
Centers
In
in the MO, medulla oblongata. Okay. So that's the second part. It's very important. Another thing to know about these two is that there are these things called cranial nerves, all right? There are 12 pairs of them that control, conduct, and sense everything from smell, taste, hearing, sight, so on and so forth, as well as moving your eyes and moving your jaw and everything that's getting moved or sensed from your neck up involves those cranial nerves. And most of the nuclei, or the nucleus and soma of those cranial nerves, will originate here and here in the pons and the medulla oblongata. There's a few exceptions to that, but most of them are there. Okay, now we're going to work our way back just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to come up here, and we're going to come back down. This structure in the back here is rather large. Anybody know who this is? Yes, this is the cerebellum. Cerebellum has got this thing going through it. Like this. That somebody at some point thought looked kind of like a tree. And it looks a lot more tree-like than I've drawn here because I'm not a great artist. Somebody thought it looked so much like a tree that they called it a tree.
Arbor vitae.
Yes. The arbor vitae, which means tree of life. Now this is white matter here, which means the rest of it is made of what? Yeah, everything on the outside here is gray matter. Now I'm going to add just one more little layer to the outside here to give you an idea what the texture is like. Because these little lines on the outside, these little indentions or grooves are really close together. It's not like how the gyri are on the brain where they're kind of widely spaced. This is really packed pretty densely here. Now, this portion of our brain is rather primitive. It's not like our higher order functions, our thought, our morality, our behaviors. This has everything to do with programming. Most of this right here, and I'm gonna define this and then I'll describe it. Okay. There are a number of things we can say about it, but of all of them, I'm gonna say fluid movements. By this I don't mean liquid. I mean like that the movements themselves flow. Fluid movements of many muscle groups.
Can you move it up?
Oh, am I on the line? Oh, sorry. Many muscle groups. Uh-huh.
So, like, if this is not formed correctly, is that why people have, like, seizures or something?
Seizures are a matter of much debate. The only thing we know for sure about seizures is there is an influx of an insane amount of electrical activity that occurs within the brain. They're not 100% sure where the electrical activity begins, but it basically activates all portions of the brain, particularly those involved with movement. It has not so much to do with this as it does the electricity in the brain, but they're not sure what causes these bursts yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question though. Fluid movements in this case means like learned behaviors that take a little while, okay? You know how they say it's kind of like things are kind of like riding a bike, you never forget?
Mm-hmm.
That's because of this guy, okay? If you'd never ridden a bike in 20 years and got back on a bike, you could ride it because your cerebellum would remember how to coordinate all those things. So like walking, riding a bike, swinging baseball bat, etc. Okay? At first, when you first learn these things, you're just activating portions of your cerebral cortex. You are saying, okay, fingers move, hands move, legs move, and it's all kind of disjointed and all sort of a mess. But when you really start getting those things down, it programs them into the cerebellum, and then you can recall and do those things much more quickly. And so, like, for example, I can play the guitar, and my left hand can form the chords without me really even thinking about it, because I've done it for years and years. It's programmed well into this. But if I flip the guitar around and try to do the same thing with the other hand, my brain knows where my fingers should go, but they won't just go there, because it's not like information that's saved in here. Just like walking is awkward when we very first learn. All of our muscles are going every which way, and then finally it all comes together, gets programmed in here, and then we're good, because this receives information about balance, this receives information about movement, records, saves, programs, all that, so we're ready to go. Yes? That is a fantastic question. I don't know.
Yes.
It would have to be programmed in here for it to work well, but
I had to write lines for punishment when I was younger, and my hand got hurting, so I would switch over. I got to the point where I was ambidextrous.
so it evidently can be learned with enough time and practice.
I think so. Like, what if, like, you lost an arm?
Right.
You have to adapt somehow.
Yeah.
People who break their arms, they learn how
Yeah.
to write with the other hand.
I had my mom, she was left-handed when she was born, broke her left wrist, and then had to learn right with the right hand.
In some countries, there are no left-handed people
Because they beat it out of them.
because they're born left-handed, but they're forced to write right-handed until they're right-handed. Yeah. Okay. Now, so moving forward, actually we're moving up. And we want to keep all this stuff cool and clean. Okay? So, we're going to put a little indentation right here. Round it out like that and bring it back up like this. Okay? Now, if I want to keep parts of the brain and spinal cord cool and clean, what would I use?
Cerebrospinal Fluid.
Yes, and that's what I'm filling this area up with. This is cerebrospinal fluid in this space. Now, this travels all the way down. This is the spinal canal, travels all the way down the spinal cord, so on and so forth. Comes back up here. It's going to pass through this thing at the top. Now we're going to draw just a couple of bumps right here, which have some significance, but not for what we're talking about right now. We're going to bring this out of the top, and we're going to bring this around like this and join there. This little section, dotted line here, from here up to here, this is called the midbrain, but that's too simple. So let's call it the mesencephalon, which just literally means midbrain. The mesencephalon. Mesencephalon. Oh, we got to fill this little area here up with the CSF too. Okay, we're moving through there. Mesencephalon, if it has some responsibilities that I'm going to try to simplify a lot, there are a bunch of different parts of this. There's something called the corpora quadrigemina. There is the substantia nigra. There is a lot of different spots in here that have different functions. But the two I'm most concerned with for this class is this. Mesencephalon is responsible for sleep and wake cycles. Also, it's responsible for reflexes of head and neck. in response mostly to lights and sounds. So when you hear loud noises and you move away from those loud noises, or bright lights and your body reflexes away from those, most of that is done here. As
Like if you have a migraine, is that the part that?
that is a good inference. I don't know. Migraines, from what I understand, have mostly to do with the diameter of the blood vessels that are going to the brain.
Because like you're really sensitive to light and sound and
Right. That's a good inference. I'm not sure.
people with depression are really sensitive to light sometimes too.
But sometimes light treats depression. All right. Now, folks, these passageways have names. Let's name this one right here. It's called an aqueduct because it's passing to the cerebrum and through the mesencephalon. It's got two different names. The easiest one is called the Cerebral Aqueduct. It's also sometimes called the Mesencephalic Aqueduct. It's the same thing. It's this passageway right here through the mesencephalon. And the last thing I want to label is this guy right back here. Do you remember what the open chambers in the brain are that hold this CSF? Ventricles. And this is the last stop for ventricles. It's the last one in the brain. This one is the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle. The third is up above it here. And then there's really not a first or second. They're just called lateral ventricles, or the big ones I had you draw in your notes on the first day. So let's go through and recap just really quickly with the actual drawing and see if we can name these structures now. You still need that? Okay. Note there's a little more tilt on the actual thing than what I put on here. I guess we do have the names right in front of us too, and that glare is a beast. Okay. What's the name of this thing my thumb is on? That's the cerebellum. Okay. Man, flexion. Okay, here we go. No. What's the name of the thing I just covered up its name?
Medulla Oblongata.
Good. What's the big lump just superior? Good. What is this thing right here? Mesencephalon. This thing right here traveling through it is the
Cerebral Aqueduct. Mesencephalic Aqueduct.
Cerebral Aqueduct or Mesencephalic Aqueduct. And this open space right here is the fourth ventricle. Yep. So we worked our way through the brainstem. Any questions about that?